The Omega Speedmaster is a watch that truly needs no introduction. The best known version of the watch, of course, is the Moonwatch, which in one form or another has been going up into space on manned space missions ever since the 1960s. The biggest difference between the original Moonwatch and the one that's currently in production, of course, is the movement. The new Moonwatch uses the caliber 1861. The original Speedmaster used the caliber 321. For many, many years, Omega enthusiasts and Moonwatch fans have wondered whether or not Omega would ever bring the caliber 321 back into production, and whether or not it would ever find its way into a steel Moonwatch. Well, that question has finally been answered by Omega, who've presented us with the stainless steel caliber 321 Speedmaster Professional, with which we've just spent a week on the wrist. The very first version of the caliber 321 came out in a quite beautiful platinum watch with meteorite subdials. Lovely, lovely thing, but it was extremely expensive, of course. And pretty much ever since then, everybody's been waiting for it to come out in a less expensive steel case that feels a little bit more like the classic Moonwatch. The entire process of manufacturing the caliber 321 again was a little bit difficult. The movement has not been in production for many, many, many years, for decades in fact. And there really isn't any modern movement that is an exact analog. So what Omega had to do was actually go back and examine a vintage caliber 321, as well as go back and look at the original Lemania blueprints for the movement. Now the watch that they examined and the movement that they examined were both worn by the astronaut Gene Cernan on Apollo 17, and they did very, very careful digital scans of the movement, and that information, along with the information from the archives, enabled them to essentially reconstruct the caliber 321 in its original form. Now, something that a lot of folks were curious about was just how close is the new movement to the old one? Is it an exact reproduction? Well, it's very, very close. The only significant difference between the original 321 and the new 321 is that the new 321's finish is not the sort of coppery finish that you find on vintage caliber 321s. Instead, it's done with Sedna gold, which is more corrosion resistant and more chemically stable. Other than that, it is pretty much a perfect copy-paste from the past, right down to the very beautiful German silver bridge on the chronograph transfer wheel. There are actually a number of direct functional similarities between the caliber 1861, which is in the current version of the Moonwatch, and the caliber 321. They're both lateral clutch movements, and in fact the 1861 essentially evolved from the caliber 321. The biggest difference mechanically between the two is that while the caliber 321 uses a traditional column wheel and lateral clutch control system, the caliber 1861 uses a shuttle and cam system, although the transfer wheel is still the same. So both lateral clutch movements, but with a different system for coordinating start, stop, and reset. The stainless steel caliber 321 Speedmaster Professional is a very, very close reproduction of the original model worn by the astronauts in the 1960s. It has a number of vintage style cues that connect it very strongly to the past. These include the dot over 90 on the bezel. There are no crown guards. The case is slightly smaller than in the modern Moonwatch. There's also these wonderful straight lugs, and Omega's included this really lovely flat link vintage style bracelet, which is quite beautifully done, gives the watch a fantastic sort of vintage flavor, but at the same time it's much more robustly constructed than the original expanding spring bracelets were that were used on the Speedmasters of the 1960s. As you would expect, it fits really, really nicely sort of into the rhythms of daily life, and during the week that I wore it, I just kind of fell more and more in love with it every day. It is very easy to read. If you don't have any issues with legibility in a traditional Moonwatch, you're certainly not going to have issues with this one. The operation of the chronograph is pretty fantastic. There's a noticeable difference between the 1861 and the caliber 321. It's a delightful, delightful sensation. You really do feel like you're operating a very, very high-end chronograph. In terms of pusher feel and in terms of precision at the detent as you start, stop, and reset the chronograph, I feel like it compares favorably with much, much more expensive watches. You know what it feels like to pick up this watch for the first time and to wear it for a week? You almost feel like you just had a piece of incredible luck, like you walked into an abandoned office that hasn't been opened since the 1960s. There's a safe in the back and the door's a little bit ajar, and you reach in and pull out a completely new old stock, untouched caliber 321 Speedmaster from the 1960s, as pristine as the day it was made. It really is kind of the dream come true. You know, you have all of the things, or most of the things that I think people love about vintage caliber 321 Speedmasters, with undeniable advantages that come with modern manufacturing and modern servicing and modern adjustment techniques. Omega says that they are making only about 2,000 or so of these movements per year, each one assembled by a single watchmaker and adjusted by a single watchmaker. So I don't think they're ever going to be particularly common, certainly not by the standards of the current production caliber 1861 Moonwatch. But if you want one, and you can find it, you're going to find a lot to love about this one.